Yeah, so man, huge thank you to our family ministry team, to all who volunteered this week to make Wonder Week just a great week for kiddos, not just here in Olathe, but in Lee Summit and at Legends as well, as we had the opportunity to bring hope together this week, whether it be through a word or through a song or through basketball or cooking or theater or soccer or STEM or art, or I'm probably missing one, but there were lots of different opportunities for kids to engage, and we just had a really great week. So thank you to those who were involved in that. Man, what a privilege to serve alongside you as a church family, to share the hope of Jesus with our community together this week. Hey, if we've not met, my name is Ben, and I serve as one of our pastors here at Hope Chapel, and it's my privilege, as Pastor Brendan mentioned, to kind of bring a close to this series that we've been in around generosity called Let Me Tell You About. And Pastors Jake and Sarah, our lead pastors, are on vacation, and so it's been a lot of fun for me to be able to spend this time each and every week with you as we dive into the Word of God together. And I told you this story I'm going to tell you now a couple years ago, but I want to tell you it again because it just felt appropriate for the day. So if you were to travel to Cairo, Egypt, and I don't know how many in the space have ever been to Cairo before, but you would find an interesting juxtaposition, just a handful of miles apart from one another. The first site in Cairo that if you were really looking for it, if you went searching for it, you'd find is this picture here. It's tucked away in the northwest corner of the American Cemetery in Cairo, and it's the neglected grave of a guy named William Borden. Now, if you've ever heard of William Borden, it's likely because of 6 words that he wrote in his journal, in his Bible actually. No regrets, no retreats, no reserves, no retreats, no regrets. So William Borden was an heir to a family fortune that was made in the silver mines of Colorado. And at the age of 16, he graduated from high school, and he was slated to attend Yale University in the early 1900s. And so as a graduation gift, his parents, who had, significant resources, his parents sent him on a trip around the world. I didn't go on a trip around the world for my graduation gift. I don't know about you, but he went on a trip around the world. He traveled through Asia, he traveled through the Middle East and Europe, and he experienced this growing burden inside of him for the hurting people of our world. And so while he was still away, he was on this trip, he was slated to go to Yale, he's kind of on this trajectory with his family business. He writes a letter to his parents, and he informs them that he wants to spend the remainder of his life as a missionary. He doesn't want to go into business at all. And upon hearing the news, one of his friends remarked that Borden would be throwing his life away as a missionary. How could he waste his life in such a way? Yet Borden's resolve remained firm. As a student at Yale, William renounced his fortune in favor of missions, and upon that decision, he wrote 2 words in the flyleaf of his Bible: no reserves. William wanted to try to live by faith, to trust God for everything he had in his life. And when he graduated from Yale, he had several lucrative job offers, including the opportunity to step into the family business and take over the enormous wealth and all of that of his family. And even though Borden had told his father, hey, Dad, I'm not coming into the family business, like many fathers would do, his dad had held aside a position for him. And when he told him, hey, I'm not coming, like I'm going to seminary, his dad got kind of upset. And he angrily told him, look, you go to seminary, you will never, not ever work for this company again. And that day, William opened his Bible once again, and he wrote 2 more words in there: no retreats. There'd be no going back on these decisions that he'd made in his life. And so William set sail for China on December 17th, 1912. He stopped in Cairo to study Arabic so that he'd be better equipped to work with the Muslim population in the places where he was going to be going to. And within 4 months of him being there in Cairo, engaging in passion and ministry, he contracted spiral meningitis, and he died at the age of 25. When his family received his belongings back, they discovered that just days before his death, on his deathbed, William had written 2 more words in his Bible: no regrets. His death was reported in the newspapers all across the United States. Even at a young age, Borden catalyzed a missionary movement, and in his will, he left every penny of his estate to fund missionary activity around the globe. And at the bottom of William Borden's epitaph and its inscription is this: it says, apart from his faith in Christ, there is no explanation for such a life. His faith in Jesus is the only thing that made William Borden's life make sense. Now, just over 11 miles from that spot that you could go to today and see William Borden's grave is the Egyptian Museum of Antiquities, where the current exhibit of King Tut is displayed. Now, when Howard Carter discovered the tomb of King Tutankhamun, It took him nearly 10 years to finish the excavation due to all of the treasures that were there. King Tut was a boy king, 17 years old when he died. He was buried with solid gold chariots, thousands of golden artifacts, literally tons, metric tons of gold was found in his tomb. His gold coffin was found within a gold tomb that was placed within a gold tomb within a gold tomb. The Egyptians believed in an afterlife, and they believed in an afterlife where you could take the earthly treasures with you, but all the treasures that were intended for King Tut's eternal enjoyment stayed right where they were, completely untouched for more than 3,000 years. Unimaginable wealth, completely forgotten until they found it, completely useless in that way. And though its discovery was a remarkable archaeological find, this priceless treasure, for all of its grandeur, for all of its splendor, has made very little difference, practical difference in our world. Within miles of each other, two graves, one obscure and dusty and ignored, the other glittering with unimaginable wealth, one tragic because of the destroyed hope of the wealth of this world and the harsh reality of a wasted treasure. The other triumphant because of the victory of Jesus and a treasure that wasn't left up behind but was instead sent on ahead. What was the difference between these two men? Both were young, both were incredibly wealthy. Wealth beyond what any of us are likely to ever experience or even conceive of. And one chose to store it all up for themselves, and in the process, their impact on the world ended at their death. And the other knew that deep within inside that you can't take it with you, and they sent it on ahead, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire missionaries around the globe even today. When Jesus walked the earth, he would teach. And huge crowds would gather, and they could tell that Jesus was unlike the other teachers of their day. There was something different about him. He had this authority unlike anything they'd ever previously encountered. And in Luke chapter 12, which is going to be our primary text for this morning, in Luke chapter 12, it tells us that there was this crowd of thousands that had gathered to hear Jesus. And they were so eager that they wanted to get closer and closer and closer, that they were beginning to trample on one another. People were beginning to get injured because they were just trying to press in to Jesus. They knew that Jesus had words about how to live a full and satisfying life, both here on earth and in eternity. They knew that Jesus had words that would help them understand how God had really created them, what it meant to be fully and truly human. And so they're pressing in and they're straining to hear. And the first thing that Jesus does is he warns them against believing in something that sounds familiar, but lacks the power of God. How instead we're supposed to live in the power that comes as a result of the Holy Spirit flowing in and through us. And in the midst of this, he's teaching. In the midst of this, you have to imagine the scene. There's all these people and he's teaching about something, and there's this moment of silence for some reason, and someone from the crowd shouts out. We find it in Luke chapter 12, starting in verse 13. It says, someone in the crowd says to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Now, we don't know a whole lot about what was happening in that moment. We don't know much about this man's story. And from the text, it doesn't really appear that Jesus is really talking about this topic altogether. But what is clear to see is that this man, whatever was going on, he didn't feel like he had enough of the estate, whatever the estate was, right? He didn't feel like he was being allotted his share. It didn't seem fair. And apparently, this was a big enough conflict inside of his family that he was willing to publicly throw his brother in front of like hundreds of people, thousands of people. He was willing to publicly throw his brother under the bus. And so hear this, if there's nothing else we can know about this story, we can know this about this man. The money that he stood to gain in the future was more important to him than the relationship he had in the present. And so Jesus replies, verse 14, he says, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" And then he said to them, "Watch out. Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable, told them this story. He said, "The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest, and he thought to himself, 'What should I do? I have no place to store all of my crops.' And then he said, 'This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, or other translations translate it this way, it says, I will say to my soul, in other words, to self, something deep within inside. He says, I'll say to my soul, you have plenty of grain laid up for many, many years. So take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. In other words, what this man in this parable is beginning to say is at the core of who he is, at the seed of his hope and his faith, he's now reached a place because he's amassed enough that he can just kind of check out and he can live for himself. He can consume all that he can right now, and he'll store it up and he'll build a barn big enough so that he can ensure that he'll be able to consume all that he has for himself later on in life. And under it all was this implication: I don't need anyone else. Not my family, not my neighbor, not my community, not even God. I have it all under control. I have all that I need. Everything is right here. Verse 20. But God said to him, you fool. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be called a fool. I don't want to be called a fool by my children, let alone by the Lord. Says, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded of you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? And then Jesus says this. He says, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. What Jesus begins to lay out for you and I, and begin to see, not just in this parable, but in other stories throughout the Bible and through the scriptures as well, is that a foolish life, if you want to live a foolish life is marked by consumption. A foolish life is identified by consumption. And it seems, and it appears to be, a life that's filled with joy and contentment. And it is for a little while. It's fun for a little while. But then you find yourself as lacking as you ever were. You had that great experience, and it was an amazing trip, but did you ever notice that as soon as your car pulls back into the driveway, your brain immediately begins to drift to what's the next great experience, what's the next great trip? Because that one, it's not even fully over yet, you haven't even unpacked, and that one didn't satisfy. If our satisfaction is contingent upon acquiring things or status or power, you will always be looking for more. It'll never be enough. You can have a barn full and still be ready to tear down those barns to build bigger barns, because more is never enough. And friends, the good life, the life that is truly life, the fully human life that you've been seeking after, isn't found in the size of your barns or your bank accounts. Now, yes, it's wise to save. It's biblical to save. I don't want to get on that. It's wise to live with margin in our time and our finances, margin in every area of our life. But there comes a time when, if we're not careful, if we're not attentive to it, there comes a time where our confidence and our security can actually become in the size of our barns, the size of our bank accounts, the size of our 401ks, the value of our assets like our home or things like that. And your sense of confidence and peace and security begins to be in the size of these things, not in the size of our God. And the good life, the life that you're seeking after, the life that you want, the life that's fully life, what it means to be truly human, isn't found in the abundance of your possessions. It's found in the abundance of your God. King Solomon was said to be the wisest man to have ever walked the earth, and he warned of this very thing generations and generations before the life of Jesus. In Ecclesiastes chapter 5, Solomon wrote this. He said, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them? The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much. But as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. He said, I have seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners. What was Solomon saying? He was saying that the thirst of consumption is never quenched. It's never satisfied. We can consume and we can consume and we can consume, but eventually what it leaves behind in you and I is a dry and weary soul. Consumption doesn't subtly grow in our lives, it multiplies. Have you ever noticed that the demand always seems to have the ability to outpace our supply? You get a raise and it feels like you're tighter now than you were before. Derek Kidner wrote it this way. He said, if anything is worse than the addiction that money brings, it's the emptiness that it leaves. Man with eternity in his heart needs better nourishment than this. Rather than providing rest, consumption, a life centered on consumption, produces restless worry. It produces anxiety. And friends, this whole pursuit, more often than not, this whole pursuit is an identity issue. It's why we've been talking about identity over the last couple of weeks. It's rooted in the question, who am I? And oftentimes the root cause of consumer debt, I'm not talking about medical debt, I'm not talking about job loss here, I'm talking about consumer debt. Oftentimes the root cause of consumer debt is a counterfeit identity. I mean, have you ever bought something you didn't need with money you didn't have to impress people you don't even like? Like sometimes there's these things that go on inside of us, and these identities and these questions and all of these things that kind of roll around inside of us, and it's a counterfeit identity. And it drives us to pursue stuff or a standard of living to secure something for ourselves that isn't even real. And here's what makes matters even harder. Companies, companies spend billions upon billions upon billions of dollars to convince you, to message to you and to me that this thing that you're looking for, you know how you'll find it, satisfaction for it, is to consume. It's to buy more, get more, experience more. And yet it's never enough. Friends, your identity, your true identity, Pastor Jamie spoke beautifully about this last weekend. It isn't found around you, it's found above you. The good news of the gospel of Jesus is that he declares that you are the sons and daughters of the Most High God. That the firm foundation of your life is the love and redemption of King Jesus. And when we have a firm grasp of our secured identity in Jesus, we then actually are free to engage our world, not simply as a consumer, but as a generous contributor in our world. And so with Jesus at the center of our life, all of life is lived in relationship with God. But what does it mean to live all of life in relationship with God? It means that we see our identity wrapped up in God. When Jesus had finished his story about the man who simply wanted to build bigger barns, here's what he said to his disciples, verse 22. It says, then he said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear, for life is more than food and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable are you than birds? Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Jesus continues, he says, consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labor or spin, yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all of his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you? You have little faith. Do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it. For the pagan world runs after all such things, and your Father knows that you need them, but seek his kingdom, and all these things will be added to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. You can sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. So you can release all of your life generously for others, not because of your incredible abilities or all the things that you've stored up for yourself, but because of the incredible promise that if God will take care of the birds, if he'll take care of the flowers, you need not worry, he will certainly take care of you. You can cease striving. You can simply know that he's God. And friends, when we can embrace that all of life is lived in relationship with God, and we can see that all that we have is received with gratitude from God, then we can see that that God longs that all we are is released to God for the blessing of others. We no longer have to cling and grasp and scratch and claw and stress and worry. All of that stuff, all of this thing that you're trying to do, it's not freedom, it's bondage. Instead, we can actually embrace the freedom of a life where we release all we are to God's design. We can offer up our lives and watch as God multiplies what we bring to the table into transformational blessings to the world around us. Friends, this is why the Lord, I believe, asks us to tithe and give generously to what he is doing in this world. He owns it all. He supplies it all. And then he invites us to trust him with it all. And when we do, what we experience is a level of freedom and joy that can only be experienced through generosity. It's the only way we get to experience. There's nothing like the freedom that we find in trusting God and releasing our finances and releasing ourselves fully to him. And when we do this repeatedly, it actually becomes a cycle in our life. Because friends, once you've experienced the joy and delight and freedom of releasing your life to God for the blessing of others, you belong to live your life more and more and more in connection with the Lord. And as your relationship with God grows, the depth and breadth of your gratitude for the Lord grows and expands. And as your gratitude begins to overflow in your life, the desire to be used by God as a generous blessing to others begins to expand even further. And it's this cycle of relationship and gratitude and release, and relationship and gratitude and release, because we have with God and from God and unto God. Proverbs 11:24 addresses this whole idea. I love the way that Eugene Peterson paraphrased it. In the Message, he said, "The world of the generous gets larger and larger." It's this upward progression. Whereas the world of the stingy gets smaller and smaller. It's this downward spiral. When Jesus was asked about what was core to life, what was most important, you remember what he said? You've heard it. It's Matthew 22. Jesus said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and then the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." He said, love God and love people. Jesus declared that these are the two pegs on which everything else in the life of faith and following God hang on, these two pegs of loving God and loving people. I once heard author and speaker Ann Voskamp, she said it this way. She said, "Love lives given," which means to love God is to give to God, right? To surrender to God, to give him our lives, to give him our trust, to give him our devotion, to give him our obedience, to give him our service. And to love people is to give to people, to give them our time, to give them our attention, to give them our care, to give them our support, sometimes with our resources. In other words, what does love look like in real life? It looks like generosity. Generosity is the outflow, it's the expression of love. And when the New Testament writers were encouraging the early church, here's the word that they used. They used the word hospitality. I want to spend a few minutes, the remainder of the time I have, talking about hospitality. Because I think in some ways, the idea of hospitality kind of has gotten hijacked a little bit. I think Martha Stewart took it, right? And so now hospitality is how you decorate your house for the seasons and, the meals that you set out for parties and things like that. And if you want to decorate your house for the seasons, have at it. That's not what I'm talking about here this morning, right? I just don't think that's what the Bible means when it's talking about hospitality, right? At least not in a broad sense. Neil Plantinga is a modern theologian, and he wrote this book called Engaging God's World, and he gives what I think is one of the most holistic and beautiful definitions for biblical hospitality. If you're taking notes, you may want to write this down. He said, hospitality is making room for others and then helping them flourish in the room that you've made. Hospitality is making room for others and then helping them flourish in the room that you have made. The Bible is serious about hospitality. Just for instance, 1 Peter 4:8 says, above all, love each other deeply because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer what? Hospitality to one another without grumbling. That last part was for me, I think. Each of you should use whatever gift you've received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. Hebrews 13, the author of Hebrews writes this, says, keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers. For by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. And when the Apostle Paul was writing to his protege, Timothy, about how to plant and lead healthy churches, he talks directly about the type of people who should be entrusted with leadership or eldership in the church. And look at what he wrote, 1 Timothy chapter 3. It says, now the overseer, the leader of the church, is to be above reproach, faithful to his wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not given to drunkenness, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. God is so serious about hospitality among his people that in order to be an overseer, in order to be a leader in a local congregation, he puts it right in the requirements list. So many of the rest of these things, we go, oh, that makes sense, right? Like respectable. We're like, oh yeah, who's gonna be like, you know who we should put up in leadership in our church? The least respectable among us. Right? Well, of course, we go, yeah, let's have them be respectable. The person, we were like, let's make sure if they're gonna lead inside of our community of faith that they understand and are able to communicate the Bible. We don't want somebody who has no idea what it says, right? We don't want somebody who's kind of like, half in on their family. But hospitable? Hospitable? They have to make room for others. They have to be able to open their life and show kindness to those who believe differently than they do. They have to be willing to help other people flourish, not just seek after God themselves, but to make space and help other people flourish. Why would the Bible make that a requirement? Why would that be a part of the core of what it looks like to be a leader in the local church? Why is this such a serious matter? Short answer, because God has been so hospitable to us. He's extended extraordinary hospitality to us. The ultimate act of hospitality was when Jesus died for sinners to make everyone who believes a member of the household of God. And if we're gonna live a truly and fully human life, if we're gonna be truly and fully who we are, we must learn to practice hospitality. We must practice generosity and hospitality in our lives. And not only when we, practice generosity and hospitality, we experience the thrill. Only when we do these things will we experience the thrill of feeling God's power, conquer over our fears of stinginess, our scarcity thinking, and all the psychological gravity of self-centeredness begins to be pulled away when we can actually begin to look at ourselves and release ourselves in generosity and hospitality to the world around us. And there are few joys, if any, greater than the joy of experiencing the liberating power of God's hospitality making us new, of his generosity making us radically different, making us into people who love to reflect the glory of his grace and who love to extend it to others. And all of that stuff gets cut off when we refuse to be generous, when we refuse to be hospitable, when we refuse to share what's been shared first with us by God, we cut off some of the work of God in our life. Hospitality, generosity is one of the greatest gifts that we can give to our world. And it's also one of the most freeing gifts that we can give to ourselves. It's grace personified. It bridges divides and breaks down barriers. I think that's why Jesus was so quick to welcome anyone into his presence. The more freely he gave of his life, the more people experienced the reality of the Heavenly Father. So what does it look like in practical terms? I think there are a couple of intentional ways that we can demonstrate generosity and hospitality in our life. I'm gonna go through them quick, but there's real simple things. One of the things you can do is you can welcome everyone you meet. You can actually greet people that you meet. You can extend a kind word. You can be friendly, open. Why do we do this? Not because we're in the Midwest, right? But because we love Jesus. Right. Not because you're good at it or because it's your favorite thing to do, but because we want to make space for people. When you genuinely and you warmly welcome people, you're giving them a space where they can simply exist and be for a moment. And I know this is easier for someone who's wired like me. I'm not trying to turn everybody into an extrovert this morning. That's not what I'm trying to say. But I made the decision years ago that I would try to genuinely greet cashiers and checkout folks at Walmart or the grocery store. And you'd be amazed. You'd be amazed at how far a simple smile and a genuine hello goes with people. Which leads directly kind of the second thing that I've discovered about hospitality is one of the ways you can be intentional about it is you can just engage people. If a genuine welcome is opening the door, engaging people is an invitation for them to step inside. And this is as simple as asking open-ended questions. And I know this is deeply uncomfortable for some of us. I'm not trying to say it's not. But when we meet someone new, we can ask them what they do. When they answer, we can ask them for a little more information, or we can try with a cashier sometime. You can say, hey, you're doing your grocery shopping on a Thursday. You say, the weekend's almost here. What are you excited for with your weekend? Been seeing a chiropractor lately for, just kind of getting some things aligned in my back. And one of the questions he asked me every single time, sitting there, he's getting ready to start my adjustment. He goes, Ben, tell me something good. Simple. But this person that I was just coming to looking for an adjustment, he's becoming a friend. I didn't mean for that to happen. He might have tricked me. Just make connection with people. Tell me about your life. How long you been married? How'd you meet? Have conversation. And I think you'll be surprised at how willing people are to engage with you. Because we have this world where we know everyone and we know no one. And people are hungry to be known. And they're longing for conversations that go deeper than, how do you think the Chiefs are going to do this fall? It's just engaging people where they're at. Another thing you can do with your life is you can make meals a priority. It's an incredible way to show hospitality and generosity to other people. The Bible over and over and over again talks about the seriousness, the holiness of eating together. There's something unique, something divine about sharing a meal. When you intentionally share a meal with somebody, you validate them, you give them honor. Many of Jesus's striking moments happened around meals. We can use meal times to build relationships, to talk about things that really matter. Which means a fourth way that we can express hospitality and generosity is to actually pay attention. We all interact with people at work or inside of our church community or at school or in our neighborhoods. And in every one of these environments, there are people who don't, for whatever reason, they don't feel like they belong. There are people in your office that feel like outsiders. You don't know that. You don't see them as outsiders. You don't see them as other, but they feel other. They feel outside. And if you pay attention, you probably can see it. You probably can spot it. You can probably identify it. And you can begin to extend some hospitality to them, to invite them to join you for lunch, to invite you to join you for these conversations, to embrace the awkward, to go out of your way, to make some space for them, and to create some space where they can begin to flourish inside of it, even in your workplace. And the last thing, and this is certainly not the least thing, one of the ways that we show hospitality, one of the ways we practice generosity is we give generously. Hospitality isn't merely about welcoming people into your home. It's about actively creating spaces where people can flourish. And one of the practical ways that you and I can do that is to give generously. And yes, we give generously to ministries that are creating spaces for people to flourish, like Hope Chapel. I hope that you're tithing, you're giving generously to Hope Chapel. That's what my family does. We give generously to our church community. Because we know that as a church, we're seeking to create spaces to meet the needs of others. But it's not just there. Through the years, my wife, Sarah, and I, we've sought to help others flourish. I don't know that we would have always called it that at the time. But we've actively sought ways that we could try to help other people flourish, not just by giving to our local congregation. But I think of times where we saw kids in our kids' school who needed coats, and we tried to figure out how to anonymously give winter coats to them because it wasn't about us. We just wanted somebody to have warmth. We've had people in our lives that got into rough spots that needed help with rent payments or mortgage payments, and the Lord allowed us to bless them with that, or medical bills, and the Lord allowed us to help them with those things. And we've done those things, not out of charitable giving, but just out of the generosity of our lives, wanting to create space for a person, a family, a loved one to flourish, to grow, to become all that God had created them to be. To create a space, even if that meant just trying to alleviate things just a little bit for them. Friends, no matter who you are, whether you're young or old, whether you're male or female, whether you're rich or poor, you can extend generosity and hospitality to others. Because hospitality is the thing where you don't have to do more, you just have to share more. And we can all share more. One of the premier ways that we embrace what it means to have the good life, to embrace what it means to be fully human, to be fully who you were created to be, is to live with radical generosity and open hospitality. The life of a human fully alive is one where we make room for others and then help them flourish in the world that we've made. Plantinga writes it this way. He said, according to God's intelligence, the way to thrive, you wanna know how to thrive? He says the way to thrive is to help others thrive. The way to flourish is to cause others to flourish. The way to fulfill yourself is to spend yourself. Jesus himself tried to get this lesson across to his disciples by washing their feet, hoping to ignite a little of the Trinitarian life in them. The idea is that if in a band of disciples or in a family or in a college or in a church, if people would encourage each other, if they pour out interest and goodwill upon each other, if they pour out favor upon each other with blessings customized to fit the other person's need, then what transpires? I love this. What transpires is this lovely burst of shalom. This heavenly peace where all, for just a moment, where all is made right in this world. And how does that happen? Through generosity, through hospitality. And so when I've been thinking about this morning, when I've been thinking about this message for a few weeks, I've been thinking about it. If I could summarize what I pray it looks like for us as a church, I would summarize it with 6 words. No reserve, no retreat, no regrets. Hope Chapel, may we be a people that embraces a courageous life of faith. People with the faith that the men like William Borden and women, so many have gone before us. They've engaged this life of faith. And they've said, we're not gonna have any reserves, we're not gonna have any retreats, we're not gonna have any regrets. So Hope Chapel, live a life of no reserve. Don't hold back in fear. Don't build up a bigger barn, just scared about what might happen someday. Press forward in faith. Whatever it is or whatever you're facing, don't hold back. Face it, go for it. Dream big, start small if you need to, but dream big. No reserves. Hope Chapel, live a life of no retreat. Choose the high road, choose the hard path, risk. Choose risk. Leverage all that you are for God's kingdom. Don't settle for safe and easy. Dare to leap. Go forward in what God is leading to you to do in life. Don't turn back. Go forward with God. And church, live a life of no regret. Choose to live in obedience to God. You'll never regret doing all that God has asked you to do, no matter the sacrifice. At the end of the road of divine obedience is a satisfying life, a life of no regrets. You do not have to understand God fully to trust him completely. No reserve, no retreat, no regrets. And so I don't know exactly what that looks like for each and every one of us. It's gonna look individual here in this space, all across this room, to every single person who hears my voice. But the challenge is clear for you, the challenge is clear for me, is what would it look like to surrender our lives freely to God, to be generous to him and generous toward others. And what you can know is you can know that your God is trustworthy. Even when there's this old country song that says that sometimes there's too much month left at the end of the money. Even when there's too much month left at the end of the money, you can trust God when he tells you to give. Even when you don't feel like you have enough in your barn and it's just your last couple of cents, you can still give. You can, even when you don't feel like you have the margin in your schedule, you can carve out time for people and help them flourish. You can still give. You can trust God. What's on the other side of trusting him is freedom. So may we be a church that pushes back on the lies of consumerism and that pulls in the truths of generosity. And may we extend our lives fully to the world around us. Let's pray. God, I thank you for what you've given to me. Everything I have, God, comes freely from your hand. It is a gift. Every day, every breath, every relationship, every gift, every talent, every dollar, it comes from you. Every good and perfect gift. And God, I believe I can trust you with it all. I can trust you with my marriage. I can trust you with my kids. I can trust you with my resources. I can trust you with my future. So God, would you pull me into generosity, to looking more and more like you, the first and generous giver. And even today, God, will we take the first step forward? For some of us, that's to give some of our time, to open up our calendar. For some of us, it's to write a check, to go online, to give. For others of us, it's about finding someone that we can help flourish. Would you lead us to that? And then would you give us the obedience to walk it out? In your name, amen.